This is Late Night Science. Today with your hosts, Dr. Axel Schumacher and Darrol Baker. Our guest today is a blockchain and Fintech expert who studied languages at the University of Bristol. She's founder and CEO of Unblocked, a hub for blockchain education, co-founder of blockchain research, a champion for women in blockchain tech, who set up the Stockholm Network think tank, connecting thought leaders and policy experts, and a regular conference speaker on cryptocurrencies, the crypto sparrow, Helen Disney. Okay, 5 more minutes to my podcast with Helen Disney. Let's use the time to meditate. We need meditation. Today we will talk about health and how we can use technology to heal people. Maybe meditation will help. Meditation fires neural connections to brain sites that regulate positive emotions like empathy and kindness. The deep state of flow that meditation induces builds social connectedness and makes us more affectionate and amicable as a person. It reduces stress and negative mood states, and also improves mental and emotional well-being. We all live longer now, much longer. But we have to use our time on this planet wisely. Don't waste it. This reminds me of the wise words of Marcus Aurelius, the former emperor of Rome and author of the Meditations, one of the greatest works of spiritual and ethical reflections ever written. Here's what he said.
Not just that every day more of our life is used up, and less of it is left, but this too. If we live longer, can we be sure our mind will still be up to understanding the world, to the contemplation that aims at divine and human knowledge? If our mind starts to wander, we'll still go on breathing, go on eating, imagining things, feeling urges, and so on. But getting the most out of ourselves, calculating where our duty lies, analyzing what we hear and see, deciding whether it's time to call it quits. All the things you need a healthy mind for, all those are gone. So we need to hurry. Not just because we move daily closer to death, but also because our understanding, our grasp of the world, may be gone before we get there. So, we need to hurry.
Yes, we have to hurry. Welcome. Hi, Helen. Welcome to the show. Welcome our audience to the Late Night Science podcast. So here we are again, episode number 6. Today with Helen Disney. Is with us from London, UK. Hey, how are you doing, Helen?
Very good. Yeah, thanks very much for having me. This sounds like a lot of fun.
Oh, it is. But wait until the bad questions come. So, Helen, so please tell our listeners and the millions of people who watch on YouTube, who do not know you, which would be a shame, but a few may not know you. And what are you doing, and what's your expertise?
So I run a platform called Unblocked, which does really what it says. So it tries to unblock new technologies and explain them to people that might not be familiar with things like blockchain, for example, but also other emerging technologies. And I think, one of the primary goals for doing that is I believe these technologies can have a major impact on how we solve a lot of the kind of social and economic problems that we have today, including problems in science. And my husband's a scientist, so we often have conversations about where blockchain could get involved in science. But the company's been going now since about 4 or 5 years. And what we try and do is not so much go into how blockchain is applied in finance, which is a lot of the conversation you hear about cryptocurrencies and payments and kind of financial transactions, but more about how blockchain can be applied outside of finance. So we do a regular annual event on healthcare. We've looked a lot at how blockchain can impact on things like the environment and incentivize people maybe to use renewable energy. We've looked a lot at the creative industries, which is becoming quite interesting now because people are getting very interested in something called the NFT, which is a non-fungible token, which is a way of essentially proving ownership of
yeah, you have to tell us everything about it. There's something to discuss there now. So great.
So there are many different applications, in other words, from, you know, not just the financial industry, but many other parts of society. And so what we try and do in our events and in our articles and our interviews and our chat shows is unblock those ideas and try and get ordinary people interested in technology.
Great, fantastic. I love that. I mean, people need more education on tech. This is so important. I mean, what would be our whole human society without modern technology, right? But Helen, so how did you end up in that field? I saw that you didn't study any technology stuff, right? So
no, I'm not really a technologist at all. I mean, I can't really even do any programming. I did try once to teach myself how to do some programming, but I wasn't very good at it. So my background is quite a weird journey into blockchain and tech. I did a degree in languages, French and Italian. I then went to London and did a couple of kind of graduate jobs and got involved in the think tank world after a year or so. And that was a kind of interesting thing for me because I didn't even really know what a think tank was when I got that job. But for people that don't know what think tanks are, it's a lot more popular term nowadays, but they're essentially kind of ideas factories, and they try and come up with interesting ways to get politicians and decision makers interested in reform. So we worked a lot actually on similar areas that I now work on in blockchain, and the two worlds kind of came together when I discovered Bitcoin and blockchain a few years later. So we looked at modernization of public services mostly. So that was where my interest in healthcare started, realizing how centralized systems are, how slow moving they are, how they don't really respond to the individual or the patient. And I think decentralized technologies have a lot to offer in that regard to try and help us get away from that top-down way of doing things, which isn't really in keeping with the way the modern world works. So I worked for 4 years in a think tank called the Social Market Foundation. I'd originally wanted to be a journalist, which is where my languages and everything comes in. And so I left there to be a journalist at the Times newspaper, writing about similar topics. And then I spent about another sort of 6-7 years building my own business, which was linking up think tanks from around the world to try and share the best ideas. So one of the things that frustrated me was when I worked in the UK, we sort of tended just to focus on narrowly what was happening in Britain. But obviously good ideas can come from anywhere. So why not look at how Swedish education works, or the German pension system, or, you know, criminal policy in the US, or in different places, and try and see, you know, what we could take from these different policy ideas and try and collaborate and find the best ones. So I spent a long time doing that, which I absolutely loved and was really fascinating. I traveled a lot. And then I kind of decided that I would throw that all out the window, and I didn't really know what I was going to do next. But as an entrepreneur and as a kind of person who's interested in ideas, I just felt like I wasn't really doing anything new. I'd been doing that for a long time. So I stopped and I went to Australia for a few months when my daughter was little. And my husband was on sabbatical. And when I came back, I suddenly got asked by a friend to get involved in this Bitcoin event. And she said to me, you know, do you know anything about Bitcoin? And I said, I really don't. I know nothing about Bitcoin, quite skeptical about Bitcoin. What is this Bitcoin thing? You know, it sounds really dodgy and weird. And then I got really sucked into Bitcoin because I spent several months planning all the content for a huge event. It was the first major Bitcoin conference held in Europe. We had 1,000 people in Amsterdam in 2014, which was very early days for knowledge of Bitcoin. Early,
so all these people are now multimillionaires, probably.
Yeah, I mean, most of the people who went to that event probably very wealthy now, unless they sold it when the prices went plummeting down. But that was just a fascinating time. And what I really loved about the event, first of all, I was completely outside my comfort zone, which I always quite enjoy. But there were so many interesting people there, and it was such a range. You know, there were the complete tech geeks, there were real libertarians who were more interested in the whole kind of idea of money without government. Then there were kind of, you know, Silicon Valley investors and entrepreneurs, really smart people trying to change the world. And then there was a smattering at that time, probably only about 2 lawyers and 1 banker who were kind of wandering around thinking, why am I here in this event with all these Bitcoiners? So it was just a really interesting event. And that led on to working then for the Bitcoin Foundation on education and outreach. So trying to explain to people what Bitcoin was, and particularly as a focus on sort of regulation and policy, because politicians really didn't know what it was at that time. They still really don't know what it was.
I think they still don't know. No?
Yeah.
Why do you think people have so massive problems understanding really the benefits of blockchain technology and how it works?
I think it's really hard to actually unpack it, because I think, first of all, people need to kind of start with Bitcoin, and then they get sucked into wanting to understand, well, how do you create Bitcoin? And it sort of comes out of thin air, and we don't really understand how that can have a value. So then you start digging into the sort of the monetary theory and, you know, history of money. Plus there's the kind of technical aspect of proof of work mining, which is how Bitcoins are created. You know, and you have to sort of go through all of that. And then, you know, people say, well, you know, can't I just use PayPal? Or, you know, what's the difference? You know, if I'm just sending money to someone, there's so many other ways I can ping it with my Barclays app. Or, you know, they don't really see that it's not just about the way the money is transferred, which can still be a bit clunky when it comes to cryptocurrency. There are certain things you need to know to keep your money safe, and that frightens people off. But also, I think it's then sort of digging in and saying, well, look, it's not just that it's about Bitcoin. It's about that you've got actually this distributed ledger. And that is this fundamental thing where it means you've got accountability and transparency, essentially about any chain of activity that's happening on a blockchain. So you've got this sort of audit trail or this diary of activity. And that's the part that for me gets really interesting, because it sounds dull, you know, an audit trail. Oh, God, that's the most dull thing in the world. But it's not, because then you can say, well, look, what's happened to, you know, tracking a charitable donation and all the different complex things that happen in the chain when money gets donated and travels all around the world to different partners, and money gets lost or corruption happens. Or, you know, you can track, as I was saying before, you know, things like you know, the production of energy in someone's house, and then potentially be able to trade that energy with somebody else so that you're not wasting energy, you know. And so those sorts of things start to get people interested. So what I try and do is find out what someone else is interested in, and then try and give them a use case or an application that relates to what they do on a day-to-day basis. Because I think that then starts to get people more intrigued about, all right, well, this relates to actually something that I care about. So they might be an artist, you know, and they might want to make money out of their work online, but they can't because no one pays for anything online because it's all free, you know. Or they might be, you know, working in a particular sector that has problems, and I'll say, well, actually, you know, this technology could help that problem, and maybe you've never thought about it before. But it is hard to sort of go through. I mean, just now, you know, it's taken me 5 minutes to explain all that to you. So
Well, obviously there are many use cases for blockchain, and there's so many different blockchains. I mean, there are literally thousands now, that different technologies that are all a little bit different. They all work not really in the same frameworks. While obviously it is complicated, but nevertheless, why do you think it is important, or let's say relevant, for the ordinary citizen, for the normal person on this planet, to dig deeper into this topic and learn a little bit about blockchain technology?
I think it's really important because it is going to affect everybody in the long run. I do genuinely believe that that is going to be the case. And, you know, there are ethical issues, there are practical issues, there are things that people will be left out of. So just a few days ago, it was International Women's Day, and I was talking a bit about that and how blockchain relates to women. And if you think, you know, cryptocurrency just alone offers up enormous opportunities for wealth generation, and women in particular tend to be frightened off by new technology, or, you know, both finance and technology tend to be sometimes male-dominated industries. But, women could be making money from this all around the world and really improving their own day-to-day lives. But also it's about control of your own money. So, in some circumstances, women get to control the family finances in different parts of the world. But also, it's sometimes easier to do that if you actually have, let's say, a wallet on your phone, and you can receive remittances from somebody in another country much more cheaply, or you can control where the money goes to because it's your phone and it's in your name and no one else can break into it because it's highly secure. So, your partner or your husband or your uncle can't just come in and take the cash off the table from the envelope, because you actually control, your own little personal bank on your phone. So it's things like that people often don't realize that this has anything to do with them, but everybody around the world can benefit from this in some way, and sometimes in really fundamental ways. Thinking about digital identity, for example, there are many people around the world who are not just unbanked but don't have a formal ID, and so they don't get access to government services. They miss out on other opportunities because essentially they don't really even exist in our world because they don't have an official identity. So they can't get access to finance, they can't buy a house, they can't have a loan. And so there are many aspects where it becomes very important for the sort of ordinary person, if you want to put it like that.
I think we talked about in the previous podcast about how proof of stake can help in that respect, where we have individuals that may have been displaced. I mean, we talked the last podcast about Syrian refugees and how they've been displaced from their own environments, and the ledger system and the decentralization of that means that if there are illegal documents or financial documents that pertain to those individuals, that they have ownership rights over many aspects of their own life. They could literally go away and come back, and there is some sort of financial ledger there that cannot be destroyed or cannot be misplaced. And so that when they eventually do go back into their own environment, they can say, well, here's the legal document that proves that this is my area of land, or this is the ownership of this particular thing, outside of where crypto kicks in and the coins themselves, or can actually, if they're taking finance with them as well, which is another thing completely. But I was kind of really interested in sort of how decentralization can effectively empower some of those people that not that you can just cut and run from a bad situation, but to actually maintain ownership of a particular area. And that goes for everybody in terms of empowerment. And I get what you talk about when you talk about International Women's Day, because it is an important part of where that value lies. It's kind of like a hidden situation about how do we empower individuals globally, and we'll bring those ideas as well. It's kind of interesting.
Yeah, I think empowerment of individuals is probably at the heart of blockchain for me. So going back to refugees, we think about healthcare information. If you're a refugee, you've been displaced, you've been through trauma, whether it's, you've been attacked, you've seen traumatic things, your healthcare has been affected, and you're going to end up in a refugee camp, and your medical record is going to be at best, on a spreadsheet on a dusty laptop that probably someone from a healthcare charity has kept. But eventually, hopefully, you'll move somewhere where you settle more permanently. Then you're going to have to go through all of that trauma again. You're going to have to repeat all the bad things that have happened to you. You're going to have to try and explain everything about your background. There's not going to be anything about your longer term healthcare passed on with you. It's only in your head. And that means you have to repeat it all and re-experience the same trauma again. Plus the cost, obviously, which is perhaps less important, but for whichever country is taking you in and offering you a new home, that's the cost to the system to then try and treat that person without full information. So there are kind of moral and emotional benefits, but there's also financial benefits.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah.
Well, Helen, obviously we have so many problems that can potentially be addressed by blockchain technology, by finding use cases. No? But wouldn't it be better if you would change our mindset a little bit, going from focusing on the problems and thinking more about the solutions? Because I see that often when I talk to people in the field that are looking for or trying to evaluate blockchain technology, I hear, especially in the healthcare environment, I hear mostly about problems, not so much about the solutions that we can offer actually with the technology. So is it necessary that people in these verticals really change their mindset? Or what do you think about it? Or is it necessary?
I think it's really tricky to get people to change their mindset. I mean, it's the hardest thing about reform, you know, whether it's kind of change management within a company or whether it's political reform. People don't like changing their ideas. They kind of, you know, have their ideas and they generally don't like changing them. So I think, you know, what happens mostly, whether it's right or wrong, is that people come up with piecemeal solutions to some existing, maybe even small problem that they can demonstrate that the technology can make a difference to. Excuse me. And often a large part of that is just digitization of a paper-based system. And the blockchain part is not really that significant. It's just, okay, we need to go digital, and it happens to be, you know, blockchain underneath this, but we're not really making the full use of it. We're just essentially digitizing everything, and that's already bringing, you know, 80% of the benefit. So I think you have to get that far with people and kind of hold their hand and show them, okay, you know, the world's not going to end if you switch over to a digital system and maybe, you know, a blockchain underneath it. But, you know, then what happens is they say, well, actually, this works so much better than what we had before. Oh, well, what else can we do with this? And that's the part where you can then, I think, say something more visionary, you know, well, all right, let's think of some three great ideas that we could do that are new, that are different, that are better than what we did before. You know, not just kind of tinkering away and improving the system from the old way, but actually throwing out some of the old system and moving to a new way. But it's almost impossible, I think, to go from where people are now to that visionary part without a middle step.
Right. But I mean, you mentioned already in the beginning a little bit of these new use cases, and let's for a few minutes not talk about the global fintech ecosystem, because everyone, I think, understands it a little bit, looking at all the cryptocurrencies, that this whole field is revolutionized. But what other fields are already actively using distributed ledgers? So the other term for blockchain. And what sectors are being potentially left behind or are reluctant to adopt such technology?
That's a question.
Yeah. I mean, I think it's still very early days for most sectors. When I'm talking about these ideas, you know, these are often, you know, small startups, they're pilot projects, you know, often they're kind of experimental ideas that haven't been fully developed. So they're not always, you know, very well advanced, but you do have a lot going on in healthcare. And I think particularly since COVID, we've seen a lot more activity in that area. So just a few examples from recent kind of weeks and months, we've seen Hedera Hashgraph, which is a distributed ledger, being used in the NHS to keep track of the temperature of COVID vaccines, which have to be stored at low temperature, and making sure that we know that they're kept in a compliant way, and also how much is left so that people can know, you know, what's available to actually do the vaccinations. We've seen, I think, in Germany, an announcement just in the last few days from IBM about getting a contract for the health vaccine passport, digital health passport. We've got also smaller projects that are getting off the ground. I was interviewing Pierre Bourque yesterday, who's from Bloodflow, and that's a startup that's looking to deal with the problem that we have a huge shortage of donated blood products, and that's a much greater problem during COVID because not so many people want to come and donate. Obviously, they don't want to go into a hospital in case they get infected. And there's a lot of logistical issues around donation of blood and blood plasma. So he's trying to use kind of gamification and token incentives to get people to donate and to stay more engaged, so donors stay more engaged with the people that take the donations. So lots of interesting things on that front. And I think what COVID has shown us is, you know, we are all completely dependent on technology. If we weren't before, we are now. You know, we need it for education, we need it for insurance claims, we need it for our healthcare, remote consultations with doctors, we need it for speaking to our parents, we need it for everything. And so, you know, lots of companies that have been slow and lots of individuals that have been slow to use tech have suddenly woken up.
Not to forget, like we ourselves, so Darrol and I, with a few of our co-workers, we just submitted a paper on how to use a blockchain-based platform to fight COVID-19. So where we basically have a platform where researchers from all over the world can share their medical precision medicine data on COVID-19 patients and the virus data, genomic sequencing data, and analyze it on our platform. So basically they have the opportunity to share the data and that way break down data silos all over the world, bring all these data sets together in one bucket and analyze it, which gives, of course, much better statistical significance on the data. And we can then much quicker get results on how to fight a pandemic, not only COVID-19, but also in the future, we can expect anytime another disease can have an outbreak and a pandemic all over the world. Because COVID-19, it's not the first and it will not be the last pandemic.
Yeah, that's a really good point. I mean, we've already had SARS, we've had MERS, we've had Ebola, we've had other things that have impacted on us. And as you say, there will be other pandemics. So I think that point about data silos in health is probably the most fundamental thing, because everything really comes down to data. And when we've held our healthcare event, pretty much every use case has ultimately come down to data, whether it's the patient owning their data or it's about some aspect specific to the type of data. So genomic data or, rare diseases, being able to kind of amalgamate information from people that would not otherwise, you wouldn't be able to access them in different parts of the world, but now you can, because the internet and decentralized technology gives us a chance to actually gather information from people who might not be in the system otherwise. So many different aspects. And another one is remote monitoring. So I do quite a bit of work with a remote monitoring company, full disclosure. But one of the things that they're looking at is monitoring patients post-COVID. So obviously we all know about long COVID now, and we don't know too much about it from a scientific point of view, but being able to do follow-up trials on people who've had COVID. And there's the aspect of, first of all, being able to monitor them so they don't have to go into hospital again, or they don't have to leave their home. So that's a tech part which isn't to do with blockchain, but then that data can be managed on a blockchain-based platform so that we can then see how it matches up with what other people are finding. So creating these kind of data marketplaces is a really interesting aspect of blockchain in healthcare.
But you mentioned already, and I find this quite fascinating, blockchain technology also plays an increasing important role in completely other fields, like in arts, in entertainment. So you mentioned these NFTs. Can you explain what that is?
Yeah, so it's another one of these horrible words that come out in kind of cryptocurrency and blockchain, a non-fungible token, which, people call nifty, for short. But what it really means is that you've got a way of representing digitally and securely any kind of online asset. So that could be, let's say, a collectible piece of art. It could be someone's street dance performance. It could be, I think just recently, a bank bought up a Banksy painting and incinerated it and created an NFT of that as a sort of unique event. So it's capturing a piece of history in a way, or capturing a piece of intellectual property, and being able to prove your ownership of it online, which is the hardest thing, because we know about deep fakes and we know about fake news, and we know about the difficulty of proving the provenance of information or ideas on the internet, where everything is just freely transmissible and exchangeable. And the internet has really caused a problem for intellectual property rights. I mean, it's fine if you're a pharmaceutical company and you have a patent, that's a sort of well-established way of proving. And obviously you've done your research in your laboratory, and that's kind of secret and people don't know, they can't share it. But when you're sharing your information, I say as a journalist or a writer or an artist or a musician, and it's going onto the internet, you've got really no way of preventing someone from copying that and passing it off as their own, or just not paying for it. So that's why NFTs are starting to get so much interest, because it's kind of fixing a problem that we've had since we've had all the wonders and benefits of the internet, but we haven't really been able to solve the problem of intellectual property protection for certain items.
It's right. I mean, we have this thing about proving and protecting sort of information on variants. I mean, we talked about genomic information and how that's important. In some aspects, you want to keep some of that information completely on a personal level. It might be something that you don't want to share, some results, some tests or something like that. But equally, there might be some part of your information that you do want to share. And being in control of that information and control who owns that and knowing who access that information, or if it's abused in some way, knowing that there is a complete ledger of that, of who's been accessing and how that's been accessing it. It kind of, I don't say it prevents, but it will make somebody think twice about hacking into or trying to hack in that information. We know how secure the blockchain environment is because Bitcoin hasn't been hacked in many, many years, and that was the last time it was hacked was because of something that had nothing to do really to the technology. And so there is that ability to keep it, your information as private or as open as possible. And I think that's the cool thing about where the elements are going, basically.
Yeah, and I think people often don't realize, again, it's one of those things about blockchain. So, Bitcoin obviously is an open source project and it's a public blockchain. So, certain information is freely available and you can go online and look at a block explorer and see all the transactions, ticking away. And that's actually quite cool and fun and interesting. But we also now have other developments. We have something called zero knowledge proofs, where you can essentially have a sort of Chinese wall between you and another person so that you can share your information, but without ever knowing the identity of the person on the other side of the wall. And so that's, area where something like, identity information or healthcare,
But
you want to be able to interact with another person without necessarily giving them all of your information. You just want to give them a part of your information.
That's right. I mean, obviously there are lots of benefits in anonymity, like to protect people in a global society. But from the philosophical point of view, does anonymity or can anonymity also encourage people to misbehave? Or does it reveal how people really would choose to act all the time if they could? Meaning there are benefits, but also drawbacks in having technologies that provide full anonymity.
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. From the very earliest days of Bitcoin, one of the things that people didn't like about it, and one of the things that happened was essentially dark web activity, people trading, whether it's drugs or other unpleasant things, in secrecy and paying for it in Bitcoin. And that was kind of the first use case in a way for Bitcoin was, people wanting to buy drugs on the dark web. And, you may not have a view about whether that's a good thing, but it certainly allows for things that are considered illegal in most countries to take place. The flip side of that is, when it comes to something really important like clinical trials, where sometimes it's very hard to recruit people to take part in a clinical trial because they're worried about their data being compromised. And we have seen, that it's actually not that difficult to de-anonymize data in clinical trials. If you've got something quite sensitive going on with your healthcare, let's say you've got HIV/AIDS, or you've got some other condition that you don't want your family or people to know about, you're not going to be kind of sticking your hand up to enter a clinical trial thinking that someone might find out. And I think the aspect of blockchain being able to offer that absolute, pretty much guaranteed privacy of your data really is important for science in that respect, because we can get people and encourage people to take part in scientific research or to share their information in a way that we could never have done before. So we're going to make huge scientific gains as a result of that. And maybe that outweighs the fact that some people are trading drugs, on the dark web. They were probably going to be doing that anyway, just in a back street somewhere. So let them do it. Maybe it's safer to do it on the internet. I don't know. I'm not necessarily defending it, but I'm just saying,
no, but this is
dark markets will always exist,
Exactly, but this is probably one of the most often mentioned drawbacks of blockchain technology. But people miss that. For example, when a lot of time I heard that all these cryptocurrencies are used to for drug trafficking and for payments between mafia clans and so on. But there were actually studies done that like 99% of the cryptocurrency transfers, they're just normal financial transfers. And this is only a very small, tiny bit, not more what you would usually see. So crime, still 99% of the crime trafficking of money is cash and normal bank transfers. There's nothing specific to crypto that would really help criminals do what they do, right?
Yeah, well, I think it's good we've got actual data and studies on this now to show that the vast majority of transactions on Bitcoin and other cryptocurrencies are nothing to do with criminal activity, unless a country happens to say that Bitcoin is illegal, in which case, obviously, by its very nature, you're then doing something illegal. But most places that's not the case. I think the other part is that money is money. So when I pick up I'm in the UK, I have a £10 note or a £20 note. I don't know where that money has been. It could have been anywhere. It could have been rolled up and, up someone's nose, snorting cocaine. It could have been paying for prostitution. It could have been doing anything. I mean, I don't know what that £20 did in its past life. And, there's now a lot more that can be done with forensics in Bitcoin. So although people can try and sort of hide their transactions, there's a sort of way of bundling up transactions and kind of tumbling them around a bit like a washing machine, a bit like sort of money laundering, literally kind of hiding the transaction history. But there's also ways of unbundling that. And so, we do get a lot more information. And really, if you've done something on a blockchain, there probably is eventually some way of finding out the trail of what's happened to it. Maybe not the complete privacy coins, but, it's if you want to follow the money, which is what law enforcement agencies do, then you're probably going to find it easier to follow a Bitcoin trail than you are to follow a pure money trail.
I think we would all agree that there are certainly many more positive impacts blockchain technology can have than the negative sides. No? And even if you look a little bit more philosophically at it, I think in recent years, we could observe a cultural trend of individualism and the rejection of collectivism on the other hand. Do you think that the adoption of global sharing communities, which is basically blockchain technology is because we decentralize everything, can this bring, swing the needle back to more collectivism away from our individualism? What do you think?
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, I guess sharing economy is kind of, it's both, because you have an individual need, right? You want an Airbnb and you're happy to pay money to rent out someone's room, or, you want to rent out your driveway, or, lots of things like that, or trade your clothing or whatever it is in circular economy. You get a benefit and someone else gets a benefit. So it's individualistic, but it's also collective. I think, collectivism has kind of had a bit of a boost because of COVID, because actually we've realized how much we've relied on government to provide funds, to provide infrastructure in terms of vaccination programs, to provide information about what's going on in a centralized way that's hopefully trustworthy. So, we may have shifted a bit away from the individualistic towards the collective because of COVID, whether you like that or not. Some people are very opposed to that. But, we haven't necessarily gone more capitalist since COVID. I think a lot of people have reassessed the capitalist way and said, it's actually has its detrimental effects on the environment. We all travel too much. We all spend too much on things we don't really need. And a lot of that has been reassessed in the last year or so. But I do think that blockchain can provide that kind of collective incentive mechanism. I think that's what's so interesting about it. So I kind of call it the incentive machine rather than the trust machine, because I think the trust machine can be a bit misleading. But I think what you can do is you can say, I've got a goal, going back to what you were saying about, can we just think of solutions, not problems? I've got a goal. My goal is to get more people to use solar energy. My goal is to get more people to be part of my community around the music that I make. And you can then create a large network of people from really anywhere in the world, as long as they've got an internet connection. And you can find ways very rapidly and frictionlessly to incentivize them to behave in a certain way. Okay, you've used solar energy, so we're going to reward you with some tokens. And then you can also trade those tokens with other people. Or, we've put on an online concert, and we know you're a huge super fan of our band, so we're going to give you the option to have a one-to-one audience with, you know, a band member, because you've unlocked a certain level of tokens or a level of involvement in the community. And, you know, same with using the internet, you know, rather than the extractive nature of the current tech platforms, you know, blockchain companies are looking to create, you know, browsers and ways of using the internet where, you know, you get rewarded for giving away your information rather than someone just bombarding you with advertising. So those are just a few examples where, you know, there is a collective goal, but there's also individual benefit. And I think that's what drives the change, because although, you know, many times we are motivated by philanthropic goals or by community goals, there's also usually something in it for us. You know, even when you give to charity, you do it because it makes you feel good, or, you know, you want to meet other people because you know, you don't have that many friends. So you're going to go and find a new community, or, you know, you do it because your grandmother had an illness and you want to support that charity. So I think it's the combination of the individual and the collective that is really powerful.
Yeah, I like that idea. So obviously a big part of it is also the automation aspect, that we can apply algorithms to our daily lives by using blockchain technology, by decentralized AI. So there are a lot of companies working on in these fields. Do you think, would a government run with algorithms, AI and statistics actually be better or worse than governments we have now?
The statistics. Sorry, I didn't quite catch the statistics part of the question. Sorry.
Would a government that runs with algorithms, AI, and based on statistics, and not only on political views of certain individuals, be better or worse than the government we have now?
Oh, it's hard to envisage, isn't it? No human involvement in government. I think, you know, the concept of a decentralized autonomous organization, which is sort of the next step of combining blockchain and smart contracts and AI, is something that is obviously very interesting to people in the blockchain community. So essentially you're running something, you know, just purely based on the rules and the governance that you've created, and humans still have to create the governance, but once you set it up, you know, it can kind of run.
And people still have to agree on the rules, obviously. So you can have the best smart contract in the world, but if you and I, if we don't agree on the contract, it's still pretty worthless, right?
Yeah. So I think, you know, that you can't ever have government without a human element. So I know there are various organizations that have tried to set up kind of, you know, decentralized worlds online, and sort of run this as a kind of prototype. I think it's still very experimental. I think there are elements of governance that you can do that way, and certainly improvements that you can make to how we run things in terms of public services. I don't know if I can imagine a world run completely on a blockchain decentralized system, but I think the concept is important.
Maybe not entirely,
making us think about how it could be. Certainly in certain circumstances.
But with the decentralization, if you think really very far ahead, and I'm not talking about 10, 50 years, really far into our future, do you think that this decentralization can lead to a global government? And if a world government did come to power, so assuming it wasn't particularly cruel or evil, would it be a good or a bad thing?
I think a world government would be a terrible idea. But I think I think the concept of shared decision making and governance. So if you think about all these huge climate summits that we have, and that, you know, cost a huge amount of money, cost a lot to the environment because people were flying there until recent times. Essentially, it's all about paperwork, and it's about, you know, changing clauses and writing different little bits. And I don't see why, you know, a COP, whatever we're on now, I can't remember which COP we're on, but, you know, the next climate meeting couldn't be done in that way. Because really, it's just about a contract between multiple parties, and each party could get to modify the bit that they need to work on, and other people can essentially agree it and reach a consensus. So I don't see why that can't be done. I don't know whether it could be done for everything that we need to do in the world when it comes to making decisions about going to war and things like that. Well, hopefully we won't have war in the future, but people always fight. So for dispute resolution, I don't know if it's the best mechanism or whether human activity is better. I think it's one of the hard things about futurism is it's very difficult for us to break away from these ideas we hold of nation state and taxation and intergovernmental organizations, because they're so embedded in our culture. So it's quite hard to just say, well, what would it be like if we didn't have any of that?
That's right. So
I think the interaction matrix between those AIs would be extremely complicated. I can imagine it working for Malta or Estonia or maybe Bermuda that have really kind of interesting blockchain initiatives, but I was going to say United States, but even for the United Kingdom, oh my goodness me, the interaction matrices between just the hospitals, EHR systems there would be immense, let alone a global barrier of languages. And the mind boggles in terms of how those AIs would interact with each other. So
yeah, I think the problem is my brain is too small to compute this idea.
unless there was a mass extinction event, and or there was some calamity that happened in the world where society had to join together. I mean, the COVID crisis is I guess one of those examples. If something like that happens, then yeah, for sure. But
I think COVID is interesting in that regard, because it's probably the first time we all have an incentive to share. We will suffer if we don't get vaccines to people in developing countries, even though we would rather hoard and say we want it for ourselves. But actually, there's no point, because if we are all COVID free, it doesn't mean that we can go anywhere or do anything or travel or have anyone else come into our country. So actually, for the first time ever, we do have an incentive to collaborate and reach consensus on something really important.
Yeah, something small, I think, but something as a vast over agreeing solution, I think. Wow. I mean, maybe on things like healthcare or personal genetic identification or things like that, basic legal systems, but as a whole framework, wow.
I'd like to see the novel of it first, I think. Probably Neil Stephenson has already done some of this, but I think I need to envisage it as a story. I'm a storyteller really in what I do. So I need to
that's a good point.
Story, and then I can figure out if I like it or not.
We need subscribers to let us know if there's some good stories out there.
So what do you think, Helen? Is humanity then headed in the right or in the wrong direction? And how did the pandemic play into it?
Wow, humanity. Yeah, I think we've got a lot of problems. Obviously, we've got environmental problems. We've got conflict around the world. Sometimes it is depressing looking around and thinking how many things are there that are, seemingly intractable. I mean, obviously, the climate is the major issue for my children and their generation. That's that for us, it was nuclear war. For them, it's climate. But I do have a very positive outlook. Generally, I'm an optimist. And I think that, we've also made amazing strides in human progress, in science, in technology, in attitudes towards, diversity and different people that used to be stigmatized, for their religion or their sexuality or their gender. So many positive things are happening. It's not that everything's doom and gloom. And I think that, in a way, COVID has shown us we can collaborate. We can be much kinder. I think everyone's leading and interacting in a much kinder way. And that might sound a bit trite, but I think there's a lot more kindness out there. As a result of COVID, I think we're just a bit more honest about how we feel and who we are and what our lives are really like for a day-to-day basis. And I think that kind of has rippled out, and we've seen so many incredible activities on a charitable level that people have done to try and help the pandemic. Small and large, small things people are doing, delivering food bank parcels, but those are really big things for the people receiving them. But also, much bigger projects that people are doing and collaborating on. So yeah, generally, I think the world will hopefully move in a good direction. That's what I want to believe in.
Yeah, I think I completely agree with it. But if you could teach everyone in the world one concept, so what concept would have the biggest positive impact on humanity, in your opinion?
Ooh, now we're getting to the tough questions.
Yes, that's why you are here.
Yeah. One concept, I think, how do we really collaborate? How do we really get agreement? And I think it's very difficult. It takes a lot of time, and you really have to step into other people's perspective. And I think that's what most people don't do a lot. Whether it's politicians, they don't necessarily understand the lives of the people that they're serving, or whether it's, us as individuals with our political views that get sort of echoed in these echo chambers on the internet. We have to remember to step outside ourselves and see things from other people's perspective. And I think that in a way, what the internet has done for us is allowed us to kind of narrow and stay inside our little bubbles of opinion. And because information is provided in some ways by a narrower group of organizations, we've got the internet where there's so much information, but the official information sources are sort of narrowing and becoming more homogenous. So, maintaining really high quality information that we can trust, and stepping outside ourselves to see things from other people's perspectives. I think those are two key things for me that I want to transmit to, the next generation.
So there's a lot to be learned, no? But in this context, I think we are really going into the right direction, not only with blockchain technology, but with humanity in general. And I love to recommend one book. I did this already in a previous podcast, and I will link down here in the description of the video, from Hans Rosling, a book called Factfulness, 10 Reasons We Are Wrong About the World and Why Things Are Better Than You Think. So this is really a fantastic book that can show us why we are really much further developed than what people usually think we are. So most people have no idea what strides humanity did actually in the past decades, and we are definitely on the right path.
Yeah, I agree. And I mean, if I think back, only one or two generations, I already have so many more opportunities than, my mother or my grandmother had, both being female, but also the time and place that I've been born. Very lucky to have been born in a Western democracy after the end of the Second World War, after the invention of the pill. I have the right to vote. I have the ability to earn my own money. I have the ability to do any job that I want. I have the technology to allow me to work flexibly and still have a family. I have access to incredible healthcare and science, that was not around, even 50 years ago. So I feel very lucky to be born when I was born, even despite all the bad things that are going on in the world at the moment. That's right.
The only thing that we don't have anymore is time, because there's so many things to do, right?
Yeah.
But talking about things to do, what would you recommend to younger people who are really exploring what they want to do in their life, and maybe they are coming across careers in blockchain technology? What would you recommend them? So where to start?
So in terms of blockchain, where to start, I think try and meet people who can talk to you about it, because I think there's a lot of information and videos, but it's so much out there now, it's hard to know what to trust and where to start. So try to find a community of people who can teach you. I think most people that have got really sucked into blockchain have done so because they were able to go to a group of people they trusted and liked, and just ask them the sort of stupid questions, if you like, which I don't think there are stupid questions when it comes to blockchain, because it's still so early days, but feeling comfortable enough to ask the questions that you really want to ask and get a good answer. And then, of course, you can go and read, there's many podcasts, there's many radio shows, there's many websites and videos and books. But yeah, I think finding a community is a key thing. And obviously we used to be able to go to meetups and things like that, and you can't do that so much now, but hopefully you find someone who's your blockchain navigator who will kind of help you on that journey.
From the technological side, I don't know if you're so experienced, but would you recommend or do you see any of these blockchain technologies that is probably ahead of the others and really in terms of usability and features, security, or whatever it is?
Yeah, I mean, I think it depends what you want to do. Obviously, Bitcoin is kind of still the master when it comes to actual sort of cryptocurrency transactions. It's, you know, it's got still the leader of, you know, in terms of market capitalization and in terms of number of people using it. You know, Ethereum has enormous amounts of possibilities for enterprise applications and smart contracts, but it's still got some kind of technical and scaling problems, which we're seeing now more also with the NFT phenomenon coming along and decentralized finance, that the system gets clogged up and fees get high. I think what's interesting now is just seeing some decentralized networks that are not necessarily blockchains that may be very useful for enterprise. So I mentioned Hedera earlier on. They're suddenly getting quite a lot of traction with some large corporate members and some applications because they have a much quicker throughput and they can do a lot of micro transactions because it's not a blockchain, doesn't keep the whole history of all the transactions like the Bitcoin blockchain does.
This is important, I think, for machine to machine transactions. This could be medical devices, this could be sensors in cars that transmit information from one sensor to a receiver.
Exactly, yeah. So for the Internet of Things applications in particular, you need a blockchain or a distributed ledger system, which is what Hashgraph is. It's not a blockchain, but it can do that much faster. And so it's very adapted for things like, you know, let's say streaming of music payments where you've got lots of tiny little transactions, or as you say, Internet of Things. So we're seeing, I think, this marketplace develop, and that's what's really important, because you wouldn't want to do Internet of Things transactions on the Bitcoin blockchain, but equally you probably wouldn't necessarily want to do your cryptocurrency on you know, a private blockchain that might be less secure. You know, so there's lots of you know, different approaches, and I think the thing is to have choice, and we'll see these systems linking with each other as well. We're already seeing this. You know, you've got wrapped Bitcoin, so you can use Bitcoin on a different blockchain, and you're starting to kind of see interactions between different systems now. And I think, you know, Ethereum and Hedera can connect with each other as well to do different things. So, you know, we're going to see people kind of cherry picking the good parts of different blockchains and sort of sticking them together a bit like kind of Lego pieces. So we'll see all kinds of creativity happening.
Yeah, wonderful. Darrol, any more questions to Helen?
Not for me, sir. I've got, but I guarantee you, as soon as we get off this podcast, there'll be lots more. But there will be questions below from all the subscribers.
So many things we have to read upon, and that's always a difficult part. No? Yeah. Helen, any last words on the podcast for our audience, for the listeners?
I just encourage people, you know, if you're listening in, presumably you're already interested in science and interested in technology, but, you know, go and explore more. We have a lot of resources on our site, but there are many others as well. So find something that's at your level, whether you're a beginner or you're more technically expert and you're looking into programming and using the tech to actually build applications, get involved in hackathons, you know, meet people in the community. I mean, the sad thing about now is we can't have physical meetups, but we can actually interact with people that are potentially someone you would never meet in a meetup, because a lot of high-level people and experts in the industry are taking part, you know, whether it's in Clubhouse events or in Zoom meetings. So, you know, just try and connect with someone that has an interest for you and see if you can build relationships. For me, I used to really hate the idea of networking. When I first started working, people would sort of say, you know, you need to network. And I just thought that was the most horrible word and concept. But I really love networking now, because to me, what networking is kind of intellectual matchmaking. It's finding like-minded people and building a friendship with them. And through that, you can, you know, do great things together, and great collaborations come out of that. So meet people, don't be afraid, and just, you know, always ask questions and keep curious.
Totally. Thank you so much. Fantastic. So let's end this wonderful podcast then with on a positive note. I think we are really doing the right things invest your brain a little bit into blockchain technology, try a little bit to learn. And the future is bright. So, bye-bye. See you next time. Thank you, Helen.
Bye.
Thanks, Helen.
You are still here, but the podcast is over. Please remember what Marcus Aurelius with his wise words said.
Don't waste the rest of your time here worrying about other people, unless it affects the common good. It will keep you from doing anything useful. You'll be too preoccupied with what so-and-so is doing, and why, and what they're saying, and what they're thinking, and what they're up to, and all the other things that throw you off and keep you from focusing on your own mind. Sometime, 2,000 years into the future, there will be a late-night science show. If you liked the show, please press the thumbs up. And don't forget to subscribe to the channel, it will be for the benefit of mankind. Last, but not least, if you watch this on YouTube, please press the bell icon for the latest updates.